Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hamilton Report. Today is the 21st day of February, 2022. I'm Scott J. Hamilton, your host, and I thank you for tuning in this evening. We have a very good show for you tonight. We have House Minority Leader Emily Virgin, who will be joining us in just a few minutes to talk about her last session in the House of Representatives and what she's looking forward to, the things that she's excited about, the things that she's concerned about. So she's going to be filling us in on all of that in just a little while. But I want to bring your attention to the fact that we are now just 53 days away from the filing deadline. And what that means is if you've been toying with the idea of running, or you've been talking to someone, a friend, a family member, a coworker who is considering running, this is still your opportunity. Something that was said today on our Chairs Live, and I can't agree with this more strongly. If you don't like a candidate, find a candidate that you can support. And that means for every position, whether it's school board, city or town council, mayor, House or Senate, or any of the statewide elected offices, because we need your input. This isn't the role of one person or even a committee. This takes all of us recognizing strength and talent of our wonderful, wonderful resources here in Oklahoma, especially in the Democratic Party. So you still have time if you're considering it, but reach out now. Don't wait until the last minute, because we have tools that can help you with your campaign right now. We'll talk a little more about that at the end of this broadcast, but it's my pleasure, my privilege to welcome back to the Hamilton Report the Minority Leader of the House of Representatives, Representative Emily Virgin. Leader Virgin, good evening and welcome to the Hamilton Report.
Hello. Thanks for having me. Sorry, I'm coming to you live from my car, but such is the life of a legislator in session.
I understand. I was looking at my calendar, and it's 1 week ago. 1 year ago this week, you were also a guest on this broadcast. Before we jump into this legislative session, I want to take this a little personal, if I may, because you and I met 12 years ago when you were a law student. You were bright-eyed and you were engaged. You were optimistic. You could light up a room with a smile. And 12 years later, I see that same person in you. How have you not become jaded in this process?
Maybe I've just hit it well. I don't know. But that's so kind of you to say. It's hard to believe that it's been 12 years. It's absolutely hard to believe it. Time has flown. I can't say that it's always been fun, but the work has always been worth it. And that is what keeps me going. I'm lucky enough to represent a wonderful legislative district that, has supported me for 12 years. And that truly is what has kept me going. And also, the inspiring candidates across the state. It's just, there are people all the time coming up to me and saying, that they are thinking about running for office. I just read about in the paper yesterday about a candidate for school board up in the Panhandle, who is, I think, in his early 20s, and he's running because he's not satisfied with the current school board, and he decided to run. And, I reached out to him and he already knew who I was. And so we connected, and it's having the opportunity to do stuff like that keeps me going. So, there are certainly things that I won't miss, like the day to day and the, all of the stuff that we have to deal with at the Capitol in terms of bad legislation. But it has been such an honor to just serve as a legislator.
Well, you've certainly done not only the people of Norman proud, but certainly all of us in the state. And I want to just take a moment to express our appreciation for the work that you have done, and I know you'll continue to do in a different realm once this session is over. Emily, what was it like for you walking in to the State of the State address this year, knowing that this is your last season?
It was pretty surreal. I got to serve on the, I forget what they call it, the chaperone committee or whatever it is, the legislators that get to sort of welcome the governor to the floor and escort him. I guess it's called the escort committee. I don't know. But escort him into the chamber. So the members of the class of 2010 got to escort the governor in, and no matter who the governor is, it's an honor to be able to do that. So it was different from the beginning, but I actually did not stay down on the floor because it was so packed down there. And even a couple weeks ago, things with COVID were very different. Our numbers have sort of plummeted since then, but at that point numbers were still very high, and so I went up to my office to watch the rest of the State of the State. But I at that point really reflected on all of the State of the State addresses that I've been present for. And I distinctly remember, not always being happy with what Governor Fallon said, but I always felt like, she was earnest in saying her policy positions. It didn't usually seem like she was running for something else. And she sort of always tried to find some common ground with Democrats. So usually there would be some sort of issue that she knew would get bipartisan support. And so she would specifically highlight that. And she would also have a lot of details, not just in terms of policy, but also in terms of her executive budget. And we have really gotten away from that the last 3 years. And,
Oh boy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that was something that was exclusive to Governor Fallon. I think governors before that did it the same way, but they took it very seriously. What we've seen, especially the last 2 years, are just campaign speeches. I mean, it's shameful, and he is shameless in just campaigning right there in the House chamber.
And that's clearly what it was. It was such a partisan address. Him clapping for himself, the whole
I know.
it was surreal.
I know. And I was telling a reporter, I think that day or maybe a couple of days after, that the State of the State address really does have the power to set the tone for the legislative session. And when you start out the legislative session, because it is the very first thing that we do every legislative session, when you start it out in such a partisan manner and saying basically Republicans are the good guys and Democrats are the bad guys, when you start it out that way, it really does have an effect on the rest of the legislative session.
Of course it does. And, it's clear to me that was by design, and that he's less interested in being governor and more interested in a future office somewhere else. And I wish
Absolutely.
you would wish him well in that endeavor. I'll just leave it right there.
Yeah.
Emily, let's talk specifically about this legislative session. The minority leader of the Senate, Kay Floyd, was with us last week, and she made a comment that I thought was very interesting. She said that Democrats seem to be much more engaged in bills this year than they have in the past. Have you seen that as well?
I think that a lot of our members are sort of hitting their stride when it comes to policymaking, because we had in the House, we had a pretty large group of legislators get elected for the first time in 2018. And so they're now in their fourth session, and they've really figured out the process. They've really figured out how to get bills through the process, and where the pressure points are, things like that, and what's realistic in terms of getting bills through the process. So especially our members who were elected in 2018 are having a lot of success this session. And just in looking at the numbers today, we have had we've had a pretty large number of bills that have gone through committee already. This is week 3. We'll have another week of committee work next week, but this is sort of the first sorting of the bills. So if you don't make it past this deadline, you're not alive for the rest of the session. And our members have worked really, really hard. And I've noticed the same thing that Leader Floyd has noticed.
That's exciting to me because it means that people are engaged in the process. We, as you know, the party has been talking about, especially the very challenging bills, the performative legislation that started coming out in November. And we've been highlighting that so that people understand what's at risk, I'll say, because some of these really do put in harm's way the way of life as we know it today. And I'm not being sensational there, but when you consider the whole school voucher nonsense and what that would do to rural school systems, I mean, that stands to absolutely devastate them. So in many cases, it really is a matter of life as we know it. What are you particularly concerned about from the bills that you have seen presented this year?
I'm concerned about the voucher bill. I know that Speaker McCall has said that he doesn't plan on hearing that bill this session, and some took that as sort of a victory. And what I would caution folks to know is that nothing is ever really dead in the legislative session until we are done at the end of May. And so you never know when this idea might come back up. It's probably going to pass the Senate because it's the pro tems bill. And then, negotiations happen when it comes to House bills that are in the Senate bills that are in the House. There's a lot of trading that goes on. There are budget priorities that people might trade for. So I think that we still have to be very vigilant in opposing that legislation. The other big topic, especially today, because there were 4 anti-choice bills on the agenda in a Senate committee. And I think that all of those passed, and they're just getting more and more extreme because of the national landscape. And so that's a huge area of concern, because with folks from Texas coming to Oklahoma because of the restrictive laws in Texas, we're seeing our clinics are seeing an uptick, and people are still in need of this health care. And Republican legislators are just trying to end healthcare access as we know it. And that's a really scary thought. We've got more extreme bills than ever. And then, we've got bills working their way through that are just another form of censorship for school libraries. And we know kids across the state need access to school libraries and to the materials that they have, because a lot of times, they're not being supported at home. They may not be getting access to good information. Much better than them just going on Google, right? Or getting all their information from TikTok. At least this is material that has been carefully selected by a trained, certified school librarian. But I guess, my Republican colleagues would rather them just Google these things. But, young kids across the state are being attacked, not just in those bills, but also bills that affect trans kids and cutting off their access to healthcare and important treatment that they and their parents and their doctor may all agree is necessary. But legislators are trying to step in and say that they can't access that healthcare. It's abhorrent, really.
Well, we've also got the so-called conversion therapy bills that would make it forever and ever legal in Oklahoma to provide this quackery. And, they just keep getting recycled over and over and over. And, it grabs a headline for a minute, but to what cost? And that's always the biggest concern, because, once the legislature goes home at the end of the session, then we're left with new laws that people still have to pay the price for.
Yeah, that are affecting their real lives. I mean, it feels like a lot of legislators forget that what we're talking about at the Capitol is real life for a whole lot of people.
Yeah.
But they're just looking for something to put on their next reelection mailer.
Yeah, so, and some of those are getting pretty wild at this point. One of our viewers, Alicia Kelly Sullivan, is asking about gun laws. What are you seeing in terms of gun laws, particularly loosening some of the restrictions?
Yeah, so last week in the public safety, or no, I'm sorry, the Criminal Justice and Corrections Committee, um, a lot of the assignments for these bills make 0 sense. But there are lots of shenanigans happening because, one committee chair will hear a bill while another one won't. So there's a lot of shuffling. It's a very untransparent process, difficult for those at home to keep up. But last Thursday, I believe, there was a meeting of the Criminal Justice and Corrections Committee. And at the last second, there was an amendment presented that would allow for open and concealed carry at both of the state fairs in Oklahoma. Because what could go wrong, right?
Oh,
Yeah. Luckily on bills like that, we've seen some pretty powerful coalitions come together with the chambers of commerce, with law enforcement a lot of times, with political subdivisions, county commissioners, cities coming together and saying, we really don't want this, we don't need this, this is not something that's going to keep Oklahomans safe. So I think that a good coalition will come together around this bill, but it did pass through a committee. So it's alive to be heard on the House floor. And then in the Senate, I believe there are a couple bills that would allow for the carry of firearms on college campuses. Which is something we deal with each and every session, even though there are already policies in place that presidents and boards of regents can allow someone to carry a firearm if they feel it's necessary. But this would just, really open it up. Luckily, again, there's a pretty broad coalition against those types of bills. All the colleges and universities oppose them. And so we've been able to fight off those bills for a long time, but you never know what will happen. I mean, if they come to a vote on the floor, they'll probably pass. So we just have to depend on people working behind the scenes. And then
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second because I'm still reeling over the state fair bills. For our viewers who are watching from out of state, Oklahoma has two state fairs, one in Oklahoma City and one in Tulsa. And there is not a year goes by without someone getting seriously injured because there was too much alcohol involved. And we're not talking gang violence. We're talking about just people who have no self-control. Mm-hmm. And I cannot imagine what it would be like with all of the families, all of the children there, if a gunfight broke out between two people. That's
yeah, or just, an accident. It
yes.
happens. But when you get in those situations with alcohol, with, it's dark outside, it's, a lot of people are around, you never know what could happen. So yeah, that's a really scary idea. We're already seeing several groups come out and say, they don't want this. The Board of County Commissioners in Tulsa has already said, as the entity that oversees the state fair in Tulsa, they're opposed to this. So hopefully we'll see the same thing from Oklahoma City. But it's a really scary prospect. And then there are several bills out there that sort of limit what municipalities can do. So they already cannot enact new regulations on the carry of firearms. Municipalities can't. And so there's this move to essentially make it really easy for someone to sue a city and get monetary damages from them. And really would be a huge punishment to cities if they try to enact new firearm regulations.
And our
So,
cities and towns are strapped for money as it is. It's not as if any one of them could afford major lawsuits on this.
right. So, of
And
course, it has a major chilling effect on them.
yeah, when the current temporary governor talks about federal overreach, big government overreach, I look at some of the things that he signed into law, which prohibit municipalities from governing as they see fit. So yeah, that's some overreach there. Let me
Yeah.
ask you about changing the age on open and concealed carry from 21 to 18. Now, in Oklahoma, you cannot buy beer or alcohol of any kind. You cannot buy cigarettes. You cannot buy vaping materials until you're 21. Can you give us clarification on the logic on why a lawmaker thinks it's a great idea to equip 18-year-olds with handguns?
The only way that it makes sense is if you look at it through the lens of pure political pandering. I mean, that's all it is. They've gotten open carry, they've gotten, basically everything they've ever wanted on so-called, pro Second Amendment legislation. And so everybody's trying to come up with something new to say that, they're the most pro Second Amendment legislator. So, for most of these folks, it really is about getting reelected. It's about whether they think that they'll, have a primary opponent or not. And they don't stop and think about what's best for the people of Oklahoma, or even the best thing for the people of their district.
Sure.
They are so focused on keeping this job that they can't see past the pandering. And that's why I say I'm so thankful to represent the district that I do, because, well, I mean, we are in agreement on most issues, but also, I've never been unwilling to lose this job over doing what's right. And that's what
That's a
most folks in
powerful
that
statement,
building
Emily.
Well, that's what most folks in that building are all about, is just staying in this job, staying in this position, and they'll do whatever it takes, right or wrong, to stay in this position. And I think that's, the number one thing that has really eaten at me over 12 years is seeing people who know what they're doing is wrong, but they're doing it anyway because they're desperate to keep this job.
Oh boy. Well, we've talked about some of the bills that you're concerned about. What are you seeing so far? And I know that the session is still very, very much in its infancy this year, but it's also things have been sped up as far as House rules go with only 4 weeks of committees and then right to floor work. What's happening right now that you are particularly excited about, that you feel is good legislation for Oklahomans?
There were a couple bills that went through the Higher Education Committee last week that I'm pretty excited about. One of them being funding concurrent enrollment for freshmen and sophomores in high school. So currently we fund concurrent enrollment programs for juniors and seniors, but this would take that down to younger high school students as well. And we know that if you start that concurrent enrollment process, start taking those college classes when you're young, when you're in high school, then you're much more likely to graduate from college. And it's a much more economical way for students to be able to access higher ed. Because we know that the cost is prohibitive for a lot of kids out there. And so giving them the ability to take as many college classes as they can while they're still in high school would be really huge for those students who may not be in the financial position to afford college otherwise. So I'm excited about that. I am excited about several bills that Democrats have filed that have gone through the committee process already. Representative Melissa Provenzano from Tulsa had a bill that passed unanimously through committee today that would require insurance companies to cover preventive screenings on mammograms. So right now, they're not all covered. And she actually learned this by just going through the process herself. But those screenings are incredibly important. And so making sure that insurance covers those and that they're not cost prohibitive for those people who are getting mammograms is huge. And so there are good things that are going through the process. I try to write about them in my weekly updates because I don't want it to all be doom and gloom, because there are some good policies that are working their way through. Representative John Waldron from Tulsa had a bill move through committee today that is focused on Holocaust education, making sure that schools have the resources that they need when they teach about the Holocaust, because that's not something that we're providing currently as a state. So there are good bills moving through there. The bad ones get a lot of attention, as they should, but they're not all bad, and we are working hard on some good policies.
I just want to mention that the two legislators that you just mentioned, Waldron and Provenzano, are both educators.
Yes, they are. Yes,
and
they
so
are.
they know what they're speaking about, and they understand to the core of what is helpful to our school kids. And I agree with you. I think it's exciting that people who really know are proposing legislation that can have a positive impact on Oklahomans. That's encouraging, and I appreciate your optimism in sharing that with us tonight. I can't believe that we're almost out of time, but before I let you go, what advice would you give to someone who has been sitting on the fence, possibly considering maybe running for office, not sure if it's the right time, not sure if I have what it takes to do it? What advice would you offer to them?
Well, I would just tell them that I was a 23-year-old first-year law student when I ran for office. And a lot of times I think that I was just, young and dumb enough to think that it was a good idea. And if I were older, I probably wouldn't have decided to do it. But, if you're thinking, hey, we need some change, things need to get better, then this is the job for you. Because there really is no better way to try to affect change than getting directly involved. And if it's not you who wants to run for office, I guarantee you know someone who would be good at running for office and representing their constituents at the Capitol, or it could be on the school board, it could be at the city level, on the city council, mayor. When you look at how the Republicans took hold in states like Oklahoma, it was starting at those local levels. It was starting at city council and school board. And so I know that, you and Alicia are focused on building those grassroots candidates, which is incredibly important. But, if you're not ready to run for the state legislature, run for city council, run for school board, run for career tech board. There are lots of ways to serve. And I can almost promise you that when you serve at that level, you're going to want to keep going because it feels really good to be able to serve your fellow citizens.
Emily Virgin, you are a true example of what it means to be a servant leader. You have done your work nobly, and with very little appreciation at times, I know. But on behalf of all of us, please accept our thanks for all that you've done to make Oklahoma a better place to live and work and go to school and raise families. And that will not be soon forgotten. So
thank you.
At the end of this session, I'm going to ask you to come back and give us your final feelings on your final year in this role. And maybe even give us a glimpse as to what may be next for Emily Virgin.
I hope I'll know by then. I keep telling people I have to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up, but we'll figure it out.
Okay. Emily, thank you so much for your time this evening. It's a pleasure visiting with you, and my deep admiration, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks, everyone.
Well, I tell you, it is encouraging. I began this broadcast excited about speaking with Emily Virgin, but it wasn't until she really got going into the interview that I just started to feel uplifted. And one of the things that our chair reminds us of so often, it is that we have reason to be hopeful It can be very easy when you're the in the tiny minority. However, as long as we remember that we do have reason to hope and that we have guiding lights like Emily Virgin, like Kay Floyd, like so many others in our state, then we do have hope of a better tomorrow. Well, that's it for our time tonight. I'm grateful that you spent this time with us. And I would just ask that if you would please consider sharing this broadcast on your social media, because I want everyone to know that Democrats are doing good work for all of us, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. Thanks for being with us, and I look forward to joining you. I look forward to having you with us next Monday night. Until then, please take very good care of yourself and your family and those that you love. Good night.